It's going to take a long time for these Ukrainian pilots to be able to fly these jets. In the meantime, if Putin does make gains, then surely the next step is to send troops, is it not? And that is World War III.
Yeah, I don't think that's likely to happen. Obviously, we can't foresee the future, but there's certainly no appetite, as far as I can see, in any NATO country, including the UK, to deploy our own forces, whether it's aircraft or ground forces or naval forces, to take part in this war. So I don't think that's certainly on the table at the moment. And I think that would be the case even, let's say, Putin's already, I think, begun a major offensive, which is going to probably develop in coming days and weeks, which could cause significant damage, even more significant damage than has already been done to Ukraine. Yeah. And I think even if he makes major gains, I still can't see NATO intervening directly in the conflict.
Yeah, I suspect there might be a limit to what we can do with Ukraine. And if, sadly, they don't prevail in that, I think at some point, if it looks like World War III is going to kick off, people are going to have to ask themselves, am I willing to die for Ukraine's territory? And I suspect the vast majority of people, normal people, ordinary people, would probably say no to that. Do you think Rishi Sunak is only promising this much now so that he doesn't look bad compared to Boris Johnson?
I think there's an element of that, but it's also right, I think, that Britain should do everything it possibly can to support Ukraine in its fight. And I think if that happens and it's effective, and it's also other countries around the world follow suit even more than they are now, that sort of action makes it, I think, a wider conflict less likely. I don't think Putin has any desire, despite his desk thumping, etc., to get into a war with NATO, which I don't think he could possibly win. So, but I do think we do need to do everything we can. I think maybe providing our own jet aeroplanes is not a practical solution, but there are plenty of countries with more practical craft like the F-16, which is used in many NATO countries around the world, which would be more effective, I think, and a more viable solution.
Just want to ask you a little bit more about, you said that you don't think Putin has massive desires on World War III and stuff like that. Does that not imply that the line that unless we spend huge sums of money right now, and the US does, and Europe does as a whole, unless we spend huge amounts of money right now, then Putin, well, he'll run through Ukraine and then he'll come for the rest of us? But from what you just said there, that doesn't seem to be the case, which might make people question why on earth we're spending this much.
Well, I think he certainly wants to get as much of Ukraine as he thinks he can, and that will be much more than he had in February last year. And as you rightly say, I think once he's done that, I think he will be willing and inclined to go even further. But I think that will be based on his calculation, probably rightly, that NATO is not going to oppose him. My view is that even if Putin, let's say, attacks and seizes or tries to seize part of Poland, I don't see Western European countries going to their aid. I just don't see it, not sending troops. Even though there is a NATO charter obligation for them to do so, I don't believe they would. I think he will calculate that he can get away with a lot more than he's already got away with NATO pretty much too timid. I just can't see Germany, France, even Britain sending their troops to die for an unknown piece of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, and I can see that, absolutely. You raised an interesting point there about Germany and France. And look, when it all first kicked off, I was certainly very vocal, and we had conversations, didn't we, about whether or not some of our European friends and allies could potentially be doing a little bit more. Volodymyr Zelensky is rattling the can around Europe today, isn't he, and saying, look, come on, please give us a bit more. Do you think that they should be doing more, like the Germans, for example? Because, forgive me, but I think the British taxpayer at the moment might be inclined to say, well, at the minute, we're propping up, us in America, are propping up this defence of Ukraine, and we're not exactly going to get much thanks from the Germans, are we, for it?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think Germany is the best example of the most powerful country in the EU, which has really failed. Germany has shown itself, I think, again, for the third time in last century and this, to be on the wrong side of history. 2 previous wars of aggression, this time being too, I think, frightened and too tied to Russia to really pull its weight. And it's dragged its heels over sending in tanks At best it sent 5,000 helmets at the beginning and then ramped that up a bit. But even so, Germany is not pulling its weight, and they certainly should be. And France also should be doing so. Britain has shown, I think, the strongest lead in Europe and probably the strongest lead in the world over this. And it's time for these other countries, I think, to do more.